One time, there was a person challenging him. He just kept trying to get Daskalos to argue back with him. And Daskalos, it takes two people to have an argument. So if he wouldn't do it, if he didn't participate, there was no argument. And the guy kept up, and finally he says, "Oh, I'm just too lazy to fight with you." And by that simple word, he deflected the whole argument. And more than once, he told me, we were sitting in the room together, and he said, people come here and they'll come to you, and they come just to listen to see if what you say agrees with what they think they already know. And if they do, they'll stay around. If they don't, they'll reject you and the teachings, and put him down. They used to put him down as being, people would call him foolish. Can you imagine? One time there was this guy from the church, a real high dignitary. Daskalos called him a dignitary of dogma, but he came and he was talking to Daskalos, and Daskalos was trying to help him understand that we're in prison both by our hells and our paradises. Mm-hmm. They bind us, both of them. And the dignitary said, "What, you don't agree with the existence of paradise and hell?" Daskalos, "Definitely. Paradise and hell exist." So the guy asked him, "What's paradise? Is it like a reward of being good, and as a reward we get to enter paradise?" Daskalos said, "Look here, sir, I give this kind of paradise to you. I don't need it. I don't need a paradise because a paradise is in the worlds of opposites, the worlds of duality. And a paradise is the opposite of a hell. In paradise, you can only reach the level of self-satisfaction, but not bliss, beatitudes, and all those really high divine states that we shoot for. I live to be in the oneness of God," he says. The churchman said, "You're speaking blasphemy now. What you suggest is to sacrifice your personality self?" This was, "Yeah, my little personality self. Why not sacrifice it?" The cardinal asked him, "What do you live for?" Daskalos, "I live to be the freshness of the breeze, to caress the people's faces who are tired. I live to be the handkerchiefs that wipes the tear from the eyes of the suffering, even the suffering of those people who think they are my enemy." The cardinal looked at me. "Really, I pity you. You are stupid." Daskalos said, "Okay, I prefer to be this kind of stupid." And that was the end of that one. But this reveals an interesting point. If a wise person meets a silly person, they think of him as foolish. But if a silly person meets a wise person, they can't understand what they're saying. It makes no sense to the silly person. So the silly person thinks of the wise person as foolish. Isn't that amazing? And this is due to the fact that we cannot raise meanings for things that we have that's far beyond our level of understanding, awareness, and experience. If you would try maybe 200 years ago to explain that you could send an instant text message around the world to anybody, anywhere, and it would arrive instantly, they would have thought you was totally foolish, if not insane. And yet that's what we're doing. So we'd have the same problem trying to help that person understand as Daskalos did with the cardinal. It's something beyond what they know. Or you could have been burned as a witch, saying such things back in those days. Now this same problem, this is the problem we find in the material world, but this same problem exists in the psychonoetical worlds, the higher worlds. Most everyone who dies, their material body dies, passes over as a self-awareness subconsciously. They enter a period of sleep in the life review for a little bit, up to 40 days, and then they wake up in the psychical plane, in their psychical shell world, in a level of the psychical plane that they're absolutely in harmony with. In fact, they're so in harmony with it that the vast majority have no idea they've even passed over. They see the same environment, the trees, the rivers, the mountains. So they think they're still living on Earth. So an invisible helper or advanced brother or sister guide will try to help the departed wake up from this illusion. They will say, "You're not living on Earth. You're living in the psychical plane." Of course, most people haven't studied this, so they have no idea what that means. They can't comprehend what's being told to them. So he may say, well, your material body's died and you've passed over. Still, they can't understand it, because for the average person, death means annihilation. So they'll argue, say, well, how can I be dead? I'm living. I'm living in my home. I'm speaking with you. I have a body. I have hands. I can even slap you. Somebody said that to Daskalos one time. This is the difficulty faced by Daskalos and invisible helpers, and the archangels too. They can't force people to wake up. They can say things, but the person's shell is so thick that it's hard to wake them up. In fact, Daskalos said his hardest job was to wake people up. Easy to tell them about all these things, but to wake them up themselves was the hardest part. To get them to really understand. So at first, the departed confined themselves in the idea of space. Of course, there is no space in the psychical world. It's a world of place. So they just recreate what they knew on Earth, the average person. And this is an event, this I think really will tell it better than just me speaking about it. Daskalos had a friend who was, he called him a dreamy poet. And the guy was all-time writing poetry, right? And he never engaged himself with the teaching, but he knew Daskalos, and he knew Daskalos was teaching the stuff, but he never cared about it. But he was engaged to this very beautiful woman named Antonia. And he liked to write her poetry and then try to read it to her, like, all the time. But to Antonia, poetry was a snore. She did not like it. He would try to read it to her, she cooked. And she'd say, go, get away, I'm busy, leave me alone. He would try to read it to her when they were sitting together, and she would fall asleep and start snoring. The poet became so disappointed that she wasn't responding to him. He just became very despondent of her lack of interest in his great love in life, and so he committed suicide. He threw himself off a high building. 50 years later, Daskalos goes to visit him on the other side. See how he's doing. He finds the poet in the exact psychical counterpart of his little house in the little neighborhood, sitting at his little desk, writing. And Daskalos says, what are you doing? He said, I'm writing poetry to Antonia. In his mind, she was still this beautiful young girl. He wanted to help him, but he couldn't. He said, I couldn't tell him that Antonia is now a fat, ugly old lady on crutches that has to pull hair from her chin so she doesn't have a beard. He felt he couldn't tell him. He said, well, do you remember you committed suicide? And he said, well, I remember falling, but happily I recovered. Daskalos said, no, you didn't, you died. The poet said, what? He said, you died, but unfortunately you haven't changed. The poet said, prove to me I've died. And Daskalos said, okay, let's go outside your house. And the guy reached to open the door, and Daskalos said, no, close the door. I don't need to use the door. And he walked right through the door and came back through the door to show the poet that he was in a different world. That he looked at Daskalos and says, Daskalos, what you've studied and the books you've written have made you crazy. He said, I'll try something. When did the last time you see Antonia? Day before yesterday. Before yesterday was 50 years. But he's caught in this, what anyone not in that kind of condition would say is a hell. For him, it was his paradise to write poetry to his beloved Antonia, although she was just an idea in his mind, not the real Antonia now. So Daskalos said, look, my friend, so Daskalos said, but that was 50 years ago. And the poet said, Daskalos, look, my friend, I know you study spiritual things and you've developed powers, which you can make people see what you want them to see, but you can't do that with me. So Daskalos was simply not able to for him to let go of these illusions and see the true reality of his conditions. So just as there's dangers in the material world, there are real dangers in the psycho-noetical world, the higher world. And the dangers are illusions. They can last, illusions can last all through your material life. They can last for centuries in the noetical world. Some of these people get stuck in these shell hells for hundreds of years, hundreds of Earth years. But they can't stay there forever because life pulls them out and reincarnates them to keep working on their lessons. And there are many lessons we have to get here. And we have to, one of the most important ones, to realize that every day God gives each of us everything we need to live in the material world. The food, the light, the air, the water. And the archangels are caring for the bodies of everyone. So what's the aim of all this work, for all this to be provided for us, for all this care to be given to us? It's a great work on behalf of each of us. There must be a real reason behind it, an important reason.